So this is more about, how to approach. There's a dozen ways to get your line drawing happening, but the basic thing of working with layers is pretty important. So when you bring in your image and you want to trace it, just make sure it's on a separate layer. And then you can lock that layer so it doesn't move. Now, I'm not saying you have to trace everything. Like some people are using tablets and you might be able to use a vector. But the trouble is if you're using Procreate or something like that, it doesn't do vector lines. Adobe Fresco does let you do both, so that's probably if you're working on a tablet, that's probably a better design tool. We do have the Wacom tablets here, so if you want to have a try with that for drawing, that's okay, and then you'll be drawing in Illustrator in vector. But regardless, you do need to have some practice with the pen tool, but there are a lot of other ways to approach it. So some parts of your design, you might be able to find a sympathetic font that's pretty close to what you want. But whatever you do, try to lock those kind of basic layers and always work on your design on separate layers, and notice how they're colour-coded. So again, I apologise to people who are already quite proficient and whatever, that we have so many different levels, but I'll just assume that not necessarily knowing anything. So just get this type size up a bit so you can see what I've got. Just drag it up. So for that fat letter E, for example, there may well be a font that we could work with for that, which obviously that particular font isn't good. So, you could spend a bit of time in Font Book searching for things. Now, it's always the Myriad Pro default, so don't accept that, but you could use, if you've not used Font Book before, that's a good way to quickly get letters because it's a bit tedious going through these ones. But, that's probably a bit too elongated. But, we could spend a bit of time. I don't want to spend too much time searching, but as I'm saying, Font Book would be the first place to go and look because you can type in, oh, look, that's a better E. That's a bit closer to it, maybe. It's still a bit elongated. But, so get your type element, if it's possible. Try to avoid, I just stretched it, but try to avoid doing that usually. But it depends on your design. So that's looking pretty close to kind of what was there underneath. But that's sitting nicely on a top layer, so I know it's separate from my design. And you can see that it's colour-coded, which indicates the layer it's on. So when you want to bring in a new object and do a tracing, you don't want to do it on the same layer. So that's when you'd add another layer, and maybe even lock that layer. But if I want to move that E, say I want to move it up a layer, all I have to do is grab the little dot and it moves layers. So see how it's now on the blue layer. So that instead of completely switching layers within the layer, you can just move the one selected object. That's actually enormously helpful when you're working with different layers to understand that I'm not moving the whole layer at all. I'm just moving the one object up and down between layers. And if you label your layers, it makes it easier to see what you're doing. So if I get rid of that back down, see how it's changed colour. Now, that'll help you. So if I need now to do a tracing, I can turn that layer off. I've still got it, but I'm using the little eye to hide it. So turning it on and off. And then if I want to do a trace part, notice it won't let me. That's because I'm on the wrong layer. Okay, I've turned that off, so I can't. So this layer 4, if I say, okay, that's going to be my shape 1 or something, whatever I want to call it. Then I know that's the layer I'm going to be tracing on, not that layer. So it's important to try and get into the habit of separating layers. And now I think, okay, this maybe I'm doing this on a Wacom tablet, okay. Oh, my bad. Just check. Now I'm going to go crazy with it. Just before you start drawing, if you go down here and check, I had the fill on. It's actually, I just want a stroke. So I can just pick a colour for my stroke, or I can just go with black at this point. But just make sure that maybe I don't want that fill at this point, it'll drive me crazy, so no fill. And if I click that little box for the stroke, it comes forward, and then that means any colour change I make, I'm making it to the stroke, not the fill. But I actually want to stick with maybe with black so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. And don't be afraid to zoom in really close. And now I can sort of start tracing my thing. And notice how I get sharp if I don't know, have you had a lesson with Illustrator, with tracing already? No. Okay, well, I don't expect you to master the pen tool today, okay? It does take a while, and especially if you're staying for the Certificate 4, you're going to get a lot more tuition with it. So don't freak out about doing a detailed tracing. If there's a shortcut to it, we'll go for that. But the pen tool it's a bit tricky to master because it's a click and a drag and hold the mouse key down and click again and drag until you get the shape you want. But as I said, you know, you might find a font that's very close to what you want to, and so you don't have to trace it. So I'm going to just do it really roughly here. And then just trace around that. So clicking once gives you a hard edge. Clicking and holding it down will give you a curved edge, and then later on you can go in and you can alter the curve, so you don't have to get too worried about it. You have this thing called the selection tool, direct selection tool, that lets you pull and push these points around. But like I say, there's nothing wrong with, you know, if the pen tool's a bit too intimidating, that's okay. There is a freehand drawing tool as well that you might start with. But in terms of doing a professional logo, eventually you'd want to master the pen tool. So at the moment it's just a single line, and I can give it a thicker stroke. So one of the things you want to look at is your tools are here. You have different options. So if something's not showing, you would go to the window menu to find it, and then I can sort of make it a bit fatter. Obviously it's really wonky because I did it really quickly, so I could go around and fix it up, which I'm not going to do because it would take me forever. So that's what I mean, like there might be a quicker way, or there might be an existing letter form that you can work with, and that's what you go for. But if you have something quite specific, then you know, the pen tool is really the professional tool, and eventually I could get a really nice soft curve. You know, I could have done a better job in my first tracing. So you have the point, but like I said, we've got a whole project in the Cert 4 which is really makes you work with this tool, and it takes quite a bit of time to master it. But that would be a beginning point. I did it pretty roughly. How to turn the line into a shape is quite important. So once I had the right shape, the right line, when I was happy with it and I'd adjusted it and everything, then I can go Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. That then turns it into a shape that you can then join with other shapes instead of a line. So once you've got exactly what you want, you can then intersect that with other things. And that's what I'm going to show you next. So say you decide that's all too difficult. I don't want to do it that way because I'm not ready to do that yet. Then you do have some freehand tracing tools. So under here you've got a pencil tool, paintbrush tool. So those of you who are used to Wacom and tablets, you'll be a lot more familiar with doing that. And that's why I'm suggesting if you do want to work on a tablet, nothing wrong with that, but do go and have a look at the Adobe product Fresco, because instead of painting with pixels, it's going to give you the choice of a vector line. So if we look at this one, a lot of you might find, oh look, it's not letting me. Why? Because I locked that layer. So let me just get rid of the colours. I probably don't need them. But this is what you've got to get used to. No matter how basic you end up doing this design, just getting used to the way the program works with layers is one of the key learning things you'll get out of it. So I want to just leave that layer. So if I want to do something new, again, I'd make a new layer, and I've turned that off for the moment. So you constantly can work with turning layers on and off and building shapes up gradually. So now I'm on a new layer, not on the other layer. I've got the pencil tool, and I could just, you know, especially with the Wacom tool, I could just trace around it. Nothing wrong with that, guys. Nothing wrong at all. Except in terms of sort of professional design, the pen tools and things like that, they do give you a lot of points, but you can go and edit them afterwards. So you can sort of muck around with those points and change them afterwards, and even delete extra points. To get really smooth curves, you want to have less points, basically, to get smooth points. So that might be the best way for people today. If you're not used to Illustrator and you don't want to tackle the pen tool yet, just trace it using one of those, that's fine. And you might find your design doesn't need much of this stuff. It only needs some letter forms interacting. So I'm going to cover that now. But the same thing, once I've got my difficult shape, I want to go and Object, Path, outline the stroke, and I've turned that into a shape. That's really important, because then I can add other things onto it. I can join other shapes with it. So if I wanted to sort of add, say I wanted to join a circle onto that, don't ask me why, but okay. Or maybe you want to just put a little star on the end here or something. I could get the star tool. I've made another shape, but I want to actually connect it to this shape and make it part of the design. So maybe it's going to end with the star or something like that. So, but now they're separate, they're not joined together. But you have a whole set of tools that lets you make these shapes interact. But it has to be a shape, not a line. That's the important thing. So to join two shapes together or do anything with them, you need to hold down the Shift key and select both shapes, and then you can get this lovely tool called the Pathfinder up. Window, Pathfinder. It's hiding down there, just bring it up there so you can see it. And it's got all sorts of lovely options. We can just join them. Sorry, that didn't join them. It should have. If I hold down the Shift key. Sorry, let's get trim, merge. I want to merge these shapes into one. Now that's merged into one, and I'll just get my swatches up so you can change some colours for a bit here. So that's changing the stroke, but what if I want to change the colour? I've got to flip to the colour fill here if I want to change the fill. So now I've got one big shape joined together. Let's have a look at what else this Pathfinder does. So I'm going to bring back that letter E. So remember I had that, and I might just hide the lily thing. So let's say I've got that letter E and I want to intersect that star shape with it and play with that. I'm not quite sure why I'm picking a star, but you know, it's a good funny shaped object to work with. Now if I overlap it, I'm sure I could join it by holding down the Shift key, but nothing's going to happen because that's type. Okay, so type is just shape, but we have to, as with a line, we can't do much with it for our logo design until we turn it into a shape. To do that, you go Type, Create Outlines. So you either you're outlining a path, or you're outlining a piece of text. Once you've done that, you can have lots of fun with the Pathfinder. So if I hold down the Shift key, you must do that, select both objects, and in the Pathfinder you can have some fun. My favourite is Divide, because it chops things up into separate areas, and then to select those separate areas, see how they're now separate? It's sliced them up. So a very powerful logo design tool. To select the different bits, I need to switch to this direct selection tool. So just think the black arrow selects everything. The white one selects bits of things. Same with paths. You want a whole path, use the black one. You want a bit of a path, use the white one. So think white tool, bits of things, or points. So get that tool, and then you'll be able to select the individual one, and there we are. You start to get something that might look like a logo design. So, yeah, if you can find a font that already exists that works with it, great. And the other thing we can do with it, I could delete, remember I've got to have the white selection tool to get the bit. I could completely delete that and chop it out, and I'll just turn off that. And now, look, I'm starting to get something that looks a bit like a logo. And if I wanted to then play around with my wonky, it is a bit wonky, sorry, but my wonky version of that, put that on a separate layer with a colour and start playing around with it. Okay, get rid of that for the moment. I'll just turn those back on and hide them. It's best you can keep stuff there, but you just hide it so when you don't need it. So yeah, what else can we do? I'll just hide that layer. What else can we do? Command Z, Command Z. I'll just go back a couple of steps to where before we did the Pathfinder. So when they're separate, you can only just lie them on top of each other. That's not such a great design. When it's tight, we can't do much with it, and you can see it's tight because it's got that little underline. So remember, I've got to go type, create outlines, and then other things we can do is we can push and pull it. We could stretch it out, which our topography purists would hate, but that's okay, we're playing around. And the other thing is, once I've got that, I can go to the direct selection tool, and I can actually just change. You find it a bit tricky. You've got to click off the object and then click back on to get a point. That's a little bit funny with Illustrator. You've got to click off, deselect, then reselect. And then I can actually just change that shape completely. I mean, this is totally awful, but, so sometimes the sorting type really does not work. But, there might be something, a sympathetic object, a sympathetic piece of type you find that works really well with it. And I was saying to Julia that maybe she should try a different font and a lowercase instead of a hard-edged E, because the L is soft. Maybe go and look for something with a lowercase e that's a bit more sympathetic to the circular shape of the lily. But same thing, if I get a different E, some of them are more expressive. The serif fonts are a bit more expressive, got a bit more personality. But notice I can expand it and hold down the Shift key if you don't want to distort it. But you can see that's type. Can't intersect it with anything at the moment. If I drag it up, I can enlarge it, not a problem. But to do anything with it, I've got to go and do that type, create outlines. And then let's just get the lily thing and have a go at overlapping them in some kind of interesting way. And it might be that you could play with the lily shape to make it match the E a bit more, for example. I just did then. Yeah, there's my layers. So, so that's kind of the basics of where we're at. Like I said, to get more sophisticated, so if this was mine, I'd be kind of trying to look at the L and maybe trying to, before I'd have to figure, see how I can't really edit the path now easily? So I'd really have to start again with that drawing with the new one, and it's not a problem. I've got my drawing underneath and I can just turn it back on and go, okay, what is it like there? Does that work, or do I like the other one better? And, it's all about making sure these different elements are on different layers. So don't try and have, say I want to do a new drawing of it, I'm trying again because I'm not happy with my drawing. Whichever tool I want to choose, I'll just have another go at that. And see what I've done? I've forgotten to reset my, it's common that you forget this. You've got to say, okay, what am I doing Do I need a fill colour, or should I just draw with the line? So this is the basics. This is all I want you to do to try today, is to have a go with some of these tools at creating your logo. And if you want to get rid of a layer, look, I made a mess of that. Just ditch it. Maybe I'll ditch the earlier L I did because I'm not happy with it. There's a little garbage can there, get rid of it. Try and keep things fairly simple, because I'm starting to get a few too many layers here, maybe. You know, what have I got here? So if it gets too complicated, you'll lose track. So you know, just lock your drawing. If you need the drawing, lock it underneath, and then turn it on and off as you progress through the thing. Only turn it on when you think you need it. And I don't need that one, whatever that was. Just get rid of that. So I'm back to my drawing. This is how you would start out. And I'm only locking them because, you know, I don't want it to shift as I trace. So go over it once again. You get your drawing in there. And like I say, you might not all need the drawing. It may be just be for part of it you want to do the drawing, and you want to join it on to the letter shapes. So this is the process. Get the drawing in there because you might need to use it. Lock it so it doesn't move. Make sure it's on a separate layer. Then your artwork is going to be above that. You know, so this is your artwork, artwork 1 or whatever. And you'll give it names so you know this is, I'm drawing a flower, I'll call that layer flower, so I'll know what I've got on what layer. And that's the basics. And on that layer, now either with the freehand, you know, I think a lot of you will just use the pencil tool. That's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. If you want to have a go at the pen tool, it's simply that the pen tool is a more professional tool for getting, you know, for really sort of getting nice curves and having curves with the minimum amount of points. So the less points, the smoother the curve. And so that's something that a lot of the pencil and pen tools in other programs, they won't give you that ability to get a really smooth line. That's why professional designers need to master this particular tool. So if I wanted to kind of make sure it's that shape, I might actually come back up here to get, because what I like about Julia's drawing is that thick and thin width that she's got. So that's sometimes why, especially, you might need to actually use the drawing to create the shape rather than just sort of doing a squiggly line and outlining it, because it'll just be even all round. So this is giving us a much more expressive shape, and I've just done part of it, and because I know about outlining the shape and using Pathfinder, I could trace difficult parts of it together, separately, and then put them together afterwards. So now I'm ready to give that a fill, actually, so I can look at it, because this time I've created an object it's a lot more fluid, and then I can come in and edit it. So I can really change the points. But like I said, don't worry too much. It's not a tool that you're going to master in this project. It really isn't. So if you're happy to do the freehand drawing tool and then we'll try and smooth it out afterwards, that's fine. And then you can see, look, I've missed a shape down there. And this is where having the shape underneath is so handy, because to get that exact shape, I can just go in there and I can just make a new layer again, and I can trace that shape. I forgot to turn the thing off, but okay. And make that white so I can see the difference. And then this is one of those instances where I can drag them onto the same layer. So I'm only moving the thing I've got selected when I use that dot. Only the thing selected, not the whole layer. It's also, sometimes you want to shift the layers up and down the whole layer, but I'm just talking about shifting one thing. Whatever you've got selected is what the dot refers to. So when you drag it down, see how it's now gone onto the green layer. Now I can hold down my Shift key, select both objects, and I could use that minus the front to create a compound shape, and there it is. It's just chopped it out. It's chopped that shape. So you can use these minus the shape things and intersect. You can have a lot of fun with putting a shape on top of another shape and intersecting it. So it works, again, really well for logo designs. I'll just show you a really basic one. So I'll turn off that for the moment so that doesn't distract us. So that's an organic shape, but if we are working with some of these rectangle tools, some of you have got much more straightforward designs that only need geometric shapes. So Shift key will get you a nice square. Draw the other object, and it could be a text. So let's intersect a piece of text. So maybe it's E for Electric Lilly again. And drag that shape up. Remember, type is just a shape. Okay, remember I've got to do something here. Type, create outlines, and I'm going to make the type a colour, so just so you can see what's happening. Overlap them, and this is probably the most common way you'll end up using type in your logo design. So when I overlap them, I can look for interesting combinations and interesting ways they work. And I could even drag that whole thing out a bit. Maybe I want to drag it even more, so it's like that. And if I hold down that, I'll get that up there a bit. Hold down that Shift key, and my favourite tool, the divide. Now they're separate shapes. I want to get rid of some of them. I've got to go to that white selection tool, and it's chopped all these little bits up. But what if I don't want any of them? I just go around and say, okay, I don't want that. I don't want, what don't I want? I don't want that. I don't want that. And I've just got, you know, some new interesting thing happening. And it's really good for finding interesting negative spaces. So again, if I just, you know, change the colour there. So I'm starting to really work, and this is where having a look at the actual shapes, that what's called the counter, the inside shapes, or negative space is called a counter. Having a look at what those shapes are can really help your design. So I think that's more than enough for you to digest. But like what I was saying was like this lyrical kind of shape could be intersected with some other shape. So if I draw a long rectangle, for example, I'll change the colour so you can see the difference. Hold down the Shift key and play around with my, oh yeah, you also can send you have a range, so you can send things on the same layer within the same layer. So you don't always have to shift things up and down layers or shift whole layers. Within a layer you can also send things to front and back. And now if I think about it, you know, I can sort of start arranging that. That's an interesting, organic, lovely shape that didn't exist before. And I'm getting a much more interesting shape than if I didn't have the drawing to work off. So the drawing had these lovely changes in, you know, thickness and thinness, and it's very easy to lose that if you just try to recreate your fluid design that you've done in pencil, and you just try to use, you know, whatever you can manage with the existing Illustrator shapes. It tends to lose something in translation, which is why we recommend learning, you know, ways to trace bits of your drawing. That it's really hard to just look at them, the drawing, and then just make petals or make this or that. So anyway, once you've got them Shift selected, so that means both selected, again you can play around with these intersect, minus the front. Oh, I didn't have both selected. But my favourite one, like I said, is divide, because then I can go back and kind of decide if I want delete that out. If I want to change different colours, so one side has a different colour to the other. Oh yeah, see, I've got the red as a different colour. So they're all different shapes. That's what it's done. So, and you can do it several times. So we're starting to get something interesting just from intersecting a fluid shape with a geometric shape. So I think have a look at your logo designs, discuss them with me about which bits, you know, you can use an existing font with and which bits you might need to, you know, create by tracing on a layer. But it's okay, it's perfectly okay to make your more fluid shapes from, you know, just using, you know, one of the pencil tools. If you want to get more exact with it, you can experiment with a Wacom tablet. You know, so it is hard to draw a lovely fluid shape with the pen. You know, it'll do it okay. So that's not too bad. So you might find you can get what you want from drawing with the mouse. But otherwise, we can have a go at plugging in the Wacom tablets, and then, you know, you've got a shape. But again, you know, I can overlap that with, gosh, I don't know what I'm doing now, but, you know, I can overlap that again with this, use divide, and go and get those separate bits and start getting rid of them. So maybe I don't want that, I just want the edge. And maybe I want that to be a different colour. It can now be a different shade or a different colour, or completely no colour at all. So you can see the endless possibilities with creating an interesting design just using Pathfinder. So that's under the window menu. You have to go and get that. It's this one called Pathfinder. That's the one with all the intersect tools. And then the other thing to play around with is if you draw a line, you'll need to outline it. So if it's just a single line, you need to give it a fatter stroke for it to work as an object. So a nice fat stroke, and then to turn it into something you can intersect with other objects. Then you've got to do the path outline stroke. There are some more sophisticated tools, and so repeating, you know, for some people who wanted to do the op art thing, there are ways of doing that, which I will probably have to do a separate, but you have this offset path tool, and you can say how far it offsets, and how, yeah, okay, we'll just try it out. So that's just offset one object, but if we made that a different colour, it would look a bit more interesting. So that's in the path, offset path. That's to get that op art thing. I probably need to offset it a lot further so you can see it. It's not offsetting far enough, so you're getting a blob. So I might do that as a separate tutorial. The other thing you can do is just use the Option key to drag, get the shape where you want it. This is probably a more simple way to do it. And then Command D will just repeat the last thing you did. So I'll do another one. I'm manually doing the offset instead of doing it sort of automated. And then if I just do Command D, it'll repeat the last thing I did. So that's an easy way to get those kind of op art effects, and then you'd have to go in and sort of colour them separately. But you can see it's quite good at getting that effect if you want it. Yeah, so that's Command D is really good. It just repeats whatever you just did. So whatever the last command was you did, it'll repeat. So we use it a lot, like Option copy. We use a lot. When I say Option copy, I just mean hold down the Option key on the keyboard and drag, and it'll copy. And I'll just change the fill or something here. And then if I just do Command D, sorry, I should have done that straight after. It's just what you just did. You can't do another thing in between. So if I do Command D now, it'll just keep repeating the same thing. So that's a good, for those of you who are trying to create patterns and think op art patterns, that's a good thing. But I'll repeat this in class with you. Each of you is going to probably have quite different demands on what you need to do. So if you've got a particular thing you're doing and we figure out a nice way of doing it, we can call everybody out to go, oh, how did you do that? And we can all have a look at it. But don't freak out that you have to do some amazingly complex design. It's fine. Just have a go with the basic, drawing tool. The main thing that's going to drive you crazy is if you don't put things on different layers, because then it's really hard to get back what you did, to move it around. You've got too many objects on one layer. So, and do delete layers as you find you don't need them. Just get rid of them to keep everything quite clean. The other thing that might happen to you as a beginner is you accidentally go inside a layer, and that can be insanely confusing. But don't freak out, just close the layer up. So you see how there's a base layer? You want to just work on the base layer to begin with. If you lose an object though, it's basically Illustrator does a copy of every single thing you do, and all you need to do is look down through these minor layers, and you can actually pick something up from one of the sub layers and select it and drag it back up to that top layer if you lose it. So yeah, if that often happens to students, you go, what have I done, where have I gone? And it's just because you've accidentally gone inside one of these sub layers, so don't freak out about that. So try not to have too many layers, and get rid of the accidental ones that you might create. So to create new layers, it's just that little plus button, and then if you just double click on it, you can name it, and that will stop you going completely insane when it gets more complex if you just name them as you go. But I do recommend getting your drawing in, putting in there first, and then it's there to use if you need it. If you need to trace around it, it's there. And if you lock it, you just click the little lock icon. See that just sits there. You can unlock them, and that saves a lot of trouble too. So if you get something you think, oh, that's great, you can lock it so you don't accidentally select it later on. And if you see you can't edit something, it's probably because you have locked it and forgotten you've locked it. So you've got that. So just that's the first step. Get your drawing in on the base layer as a reference for you. Look at your logo. See if there are existing shapes like circles, etc. that you can work with. Work with some fonts that are sympathetic if they're going to be part of the logo. And that's the learning that you're going to get from this. Don't be over-perfectionist about it. It's your first go. We don't expect perfection. It's just give it a go, have a go at using the layers. Illustrator is not necessarily a very intuitive tool when you're used to using a tablet. It does take you a while for you to get used to it, but that's, it is a professional tool used across industry. So any kind of skills you pick up in it, especially if you're planning to go further in graphic design, they're going to stand you in good stead. And Illustrator's on the iPad now, so you'll find that a lot of the things you can do in the programs, in the actual programs, you can do on the tablet apps as well. And like I said, have a look at Adobe Fresco, because the drawing tools in that are terrific, and they turn into, you can choose between vector and raster. So painting with one brush. But if you know it's a logo design, you need vector. Why do you need vector?
Scale it up and down.
Yeah, because what if we want to put this logo on the Harbour Bridge? You can't do that with a raster thing you've created in Procreate. You can't do that. As it expands, the dots will get further apart and the whole thing just breaks down. Whereas a vector image is entirely scalable, and your logo can go from a tiny little thing on a Facebook page or a favicon for an Instagram account or something, all the way from that up to something on the side of a truck, and your client can use it everywhere. So that's why we talk so much about vector for logo designs, because it's got that flexibility. Okay, enough for me. Any questions? Are we all happy to go back and just start having a go at drawing it up? First step, get your pencil drawing in on a layer. You might end up not using much of it. That's okay, but it's there as a reference.